Yeah, we're going to jump right into our first presentation, Remaining Optimistic in Uncertain Times. Next slide. We first have Dr. Felicia Speed. She is the Vice President of Social Services for Fresenius Kidney Care. She has over 22 years of nephrology experience, where she has functioned as a facility and regional lead social worker, operations manager, and division lead social worker. Dr. Speed has served as a member of the ESRD Network 6 Medical Review Board and chairperson for the Council of Nephrology Social Work. She has a strong passion and commitment to the development of social work interventions to improve dialysis patient engagement and their quality of life. We also have Donna Davis. She is a retired high school and college literature teacher. She has been on in-center hemodialysis for 14 years after she had a failed kidney transplant. Donna has been a patient subject matter expert with the ESRD NCC, National Patient and Family Engagement Learning and Action Network, for 2 years. She is proud of the resources she's helped produce with the NPFE-LAN. Kidney education and polycystic kidney disease awareness are her areas of passion. So I will turn it over to Dr. Speed.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very excited to talk about something that actually is very dear to my heart. During the pandemic, I really began to delve into a lot of research and reading and trying to find ways to support the healthcare professionals within nephrology as well as our patients. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Today, I'm grateful that I get to actually open up the summit, so this is an honor. But I want to talk about remaining optimistic in uncertain times. So even at this moment, just think about it. How do you address uncertainty? What is your reaction when you hear bad news about your health or your loved one's health and the stock market or the economy or wars or the nation's health and security? We are living in uncertain times, and we feel, all of us, regardless of what our positions are, we feel great apprehension as we read the newspapers and watch news broadcasts. And oftentimes we're stunned and panicked sometimes. And we think when things hit us unexpectedly, there is like no time to catch your breath. We fear our future for our children, for those that are coming after us. And we really cringe at the thought of how our world has changed. I can tell you, as I'm getting older, and I'm grateful for that. But as I'm getting older, I am realizing how much the world is just continuously changing. And in that, we look for answers, for comfort, for security, for hope, for stability and peace. And we want to fully recover fast, right? But sometimes the world comes crashing down on us, even in our own worlds, our own spheres. And within each of us is the ability, believe it or not, to rebound from bad news, from tragedy and setbacks. And as we process the reality of what has happened, we initially assess our losses and examine how our lives will change or how they have changed. And we see our world crumbling around us. And I know this sounds very dismal, but I really want us to think about how uncertain our times really are. And the ability to rebound faster is connected to our resiliency. And in my work in the last 22 years, seeing amazing patients, I have learned how to be resilient, not from my own experiences per se, but by living and journeying and partnering with our patients. I truly understand, and even with our caregivers, truly how to be resilient. Our ability to be flexible, to adapt to change, to see hope in our future. We must recognize, first of all, that change is constant. And we must be open to possibilities. Not all change is bad. And we have to see the past, the tragedy, the crisis, or the setback, and realize that life at this time may look bleak, but there will be better tomorrows. And our ability to visualize and see a brighter future, that's what really keeps our spirits high. And too often, people are dehydrated in their spirit. They're overwhelmed with the complications of their life, and their energy is depleted, and they're thinking, not really thinking clearly, and their environment and the companies, and they keep, it really begins to affect them. And we can get to a place that we are just emotionally drained and really unable to think very far. What I'm learning is that when you tap into your resiliency, you're able to go into that problem solving mode and you investigate the facts of the situation. You look at everything, you begin to critically think, and you seek wisdom from others. I love peer mentoring because that's where I see where dialysis patients really, where you really get to hear from others, not just hearing from professionals, but hearing from people who are truly going through the journey. And that's why I'm so glad that Ms. Donna is joining us today as well. To be able to look back at history and study trends, look at knowledge, and that's where you can tap into this power and realize that options are available and solutions are available. And then you can choose a plan of action. Because what really keeps us bound is when we feel like there are no options, where we can't get to a place to reimagine what our quality of life can look like. But as you begin to truly understand that every single one of us have within us resiliency, then we tap into that support network, our friends, our family, our colleagues, and ask for help. And, offer encouragement and then say, hey, I need to be encouraged along the way. This is what truly connects us and it hydrates our spirit. Because I want you to understand that resilience is not a trampoline where you're down one moment and up the next. It's more like climbing a mountain without a trail map. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen next. It takes time, it takes strength, and help from people around you. And you'll likely experience setbacks along the way, and that's okay. But eventually, you reach the top and you look back and you're like, wow, look how far I've come. And knowing that you didn't do it alone. Next slide. So I do want to just acknowledge that stress is real. It's true. We all experience it. And like I said, uncertain times creates the stress, the just trying to deal with the unknown of, and what I'm hearing recently that really I was just like, wow, I didn't think about it until it was brought to my attention, was just simply gas prices. Like, you're thinking, oh, we're in dialysis. What does that have to do with gas prices? Everything. Because if a person is trying to get to treatment 3 times a week and the gas prices are where they are, and some of our patients, you have them to travel so far to get to the dialysis clinic, that impacts income. That impacts our reserve of what we can afford. And most people there are people that are now sitting there trying to think, well, if I have to choose between going to treatment and gas and food, because we were just thinking about medications, right? It was always making a decision between medications and food. Now it's gas and food. So it's overcoming that unknown, the unknown of, what's going to be the status of my health next year, or the status of my health in the next 6 months. That uncertainty creates that stress. And then just feeling overwhelmed, being inundated with so much information, right? And it's like it's ongoing. It's just overcoming it. It's coming in like an avalanche at times. And guess what that does? That creates lots of aches, lots of pains, because we hold it in, right? We kind of, they talk about, our stress response, and it's that fight, flight, freeze. Well, the freeze was a new one, and that's the one many of us are grabbing hold to. We're not running away, and we ain't trying to fight nobody, but we do feel stuck. We do feel like I really don't know what to do next. And when we hold that in, when we're already dealing with our own other health issues, and now you tack on the pains and the aches because your body is responding to how you're doing emotionally and mentally, because we are a whole person. So then you begin to have trouble sleeping, right? And it's not always, difficulty falling asleep. That's not what gets us. It's when you wake up in the middle of the night, right? You wake up in the middle of the night and then you can't go back because your mind is racing. And it's like little hamsters on all these little wheels just running around. And you're thinking about so many things. And then when you do wake up, After you finally went to sleep for like 1 hour, you wake up and then you have difficulty concentrating because there's too many things and you can't seem to stay focused on that one task. And so when you're moving from one thing to the next, or even you'll find yourself even in a conversation not being able to focus on the interaction. To me, what I find is that sometimes stress keeps us from being present. It keeps us from being present with the people that we're with at that moment, whether it's that conversation, whether it's that task, because we're always thinking of the future. Thinking about uncertain times keeps you in the future, but it robs you of the present. It keeps you from really creating the memories of the now. And the thing is, if we don't learn how to deal with some of that stress, it can begin to rob us of those many things. So on the next slide, I wanted to bring this, not that I'm into science and I'm not like a physician or even a nurse, but I do want us to understand how stress affects us. So if you tap it one time, you'll see where when it starts with the brain, right? And then, then you have it goes to the brain, goes to the pituitary gland, it goes into that. But what I want you to see is the adrenal gland. You see what it's pushing out? It's pushing out cortisol, it's pushing out adrenaline. That's why mothers are able to lift up cars to save their children, right? Because it goes into the bloodstream to give us what we need at that moment. But guess what? When it doesn't have anywhere to go, unfortunately, it gets all stored up in our stomach, in our abdomen area. And I wish it would just go back into the bloodstream or just go, make it circle away back to the adrenal glands. But that's not what happens. And so because of that, our body's response to that stress over time, when you see where it talks about the liver converting the glycogen to glucose, that's what we're seeing more people having issues with diabetes because of stress, because of chronic stress, not just stress every now and then. I'm talking about the chronic stress where it's never ending, right? And it's not necessarily always how much stress we have, is how we're responding to it. Because again, if you're always in that fight, flight, freeze, this is what your body is doing. And then you also see increased blood pressure. So those are the two things I see most often, is the diabetes and the hypertension. We have increased sweating, you're breathing faster, you have accelerated heart rate. So sometimes that leads to panic attacks. And then also it slows down your digestive system. And that's why oftentimes you'll hear people talk about, them having irritable bowel syndrome because of the chronic stress that we're carrying. So do we need to do something about it? Do we need to acknowledge it? Absolutely. Next slide. So again, how do we deal with our stress? How do we cope with our stress? Well, first, I really want you to understand, again, the importance of resiliency. Resiliency is not something that, like I said, it's not like you're on a trampoline. It's more like you're moving up a mountain, but it's about giving people, sorry, somebody got a very loud car. It's about giving people the emotional strength to cope with trauma, adversity, and hardship. Resilient people utilize their resources. So the first thing I want you to think about is when you're in those stressful moments, instead of automatically thinking about what can you do, right? And I'm in this all by myself. The first thing, acknowledge your resources. And that's just not your finances. Those are your people, right? And then acknowledge your strengths. Acknowledge what you're good at. Acknowledge what you've already overcome. You have amazing strengths in you that sometimes get dismissed because we always want to focus on the weaknesses. We always want to focus on what we don't have. Yes, I'm going to be honest with you. I am not, they always talk about the half empty, the half full. I'm not half empty, so I'm not a pessimistic person. But I'm also usually not very, I guess you could say completely optimistic all the time, because people think about half full. I'm really a refillable person. I'm just like, okay, I have to be realistic about this. It's not half empty, it's not half full, but it is refillable. It's refillable because I'm tapping into my resources. I'm tapping into the strengths, tapping into the skills, the things that can help you overcome that challenge. And when you realize that you don't have to do it by yourself, then you're able to be able to adapt, to learn, to be flexible, to realize things are going to constantly be changing. Change is inevitable. How we respond to it is what we truly can control. And learn. I'm not saying live on Google, but talk to people who have been through it. Talk to your healthcare professionals. When we do that, when we're forever wanting to learn, it builds that resiliency because you're able to tap into those tools and your knowledge and say, wait a minute, I heard about this. So I do know what happens with this. That is the way you're able to be resilient. Next slide. So when I did my research and really wanted to understand optimism, these are a couple of things that I learned. Optimism is a powerful tool that allows us to reframe a situation. And so what does that mean? It's really looking at it from a different angle, from a different perspective. One of the things that I've learned is that when I'm looking at something, even in uncertain times, we sometimes jump into what is it that I don't want, right? But what I'm going to ask you to do is reframe the situation in looking at what I do want. And let me give you a very, very simple example. I was just diagnosed with hypertension and all of this, right? So at first I was like, oh yeah, I need to exercise. I need to do all these things, right? And all I kept thinking about all the things I don't want. I don't want to be on medication. I don't want this. And that was all that was doing, was creating all of this anxiety. And I wasn't very optimistic. So when I thought about trying to eat right, when I thought about trying to follow things, all it did was make me irritated and frustrated. But when I began to think about what I do want, right? I want to be able to have energy to be able to do some of the things that I enjoy. I want to be able to spend time with my family. I started to begin, that's how you shift and reframe a situation, by focusing what you do want and not just focusing on what you don't want. Next, thinking the strategy that empowers. What is it that what strategy? Who do I need to talk to? Not just going to co-sign on my misery, because I know we love to find somebody that can co-sign, right? But it's a thinking strategy that empowers us and helps us build that confidence. Who's in my cheerleader corner? Who's going to be cheering me on? Who's going to really help me think about how I can do this differently? And it can breed a sense of personal strength. And it's the foundation for resiliency. And like anything, with practice, you get better at it. And our current circumstances provide the perfect opportunity to do just that. Because history tells us that during times of stress, guess what? Guess what you learn? You learn what your values are. You learn what's important, and it becomes very clear. That is why during the pandemic, so many people began to focus on family, because you realize family was important. Once you realize what's really important to you, that's what happens in great stress. When you are overwhelmed with a lot, begin to focus on what's really important to me right now. And what happens, we've learned as well in history, we've learned to adapt. I can tell you, we have adapted to so many things, even in the midst of the pandemic, and we recalibrate. Now, when you think about recalibrating, I always think about, back in the day, they had the old grandfather clocks. People don't really have those anymore. But in the old grandfather clocks, they had to recalibrate it, right? Sometimes you just need to pause and realign yourself to, again, what matters most. Where are my priorities? And guess what? What we've learned historically, if you look over the decades, as people, as humanity, we have learned to carry on. We have learned to keep going. And so if you tap into what history tells us that we're able to do, that we're able to prioritize, we're able to adapt, we're able to recalibrate, then we know that yes, this is rough, but we can get through it. And what's really important on the next slide is understanding how to put things in perspective. So Dr. Martin Seligman, I probably messed up his name. He says the human mind is automatically attracted to the worst possible case, right? So this is a way to begin to shift your mind to a more optimistic perspective. And he says that catastrophizing is an evolutionary adaptive frame of mind, which means we automatically think of the worst. So the first thing he recommends is that you refocus the mind. He suggests putting it in perspective, which starts by conjuring up the worst scenario, right? Which our minds tend to do anyway. So we're not training it to do anything it's not going to do. But then move to the best case scenario and finishes with the most likely scenario. And the idea is to redirect our thoughts. So step one, ask yourself, what is the worst possible situation? What is the worst that can happen? This would change depending on your age and your health. And Seligman offers as an example of his own scenario about the 77-year-old man who lives in Montgomery, Pennsylvania, which was recently shuttered to prevent the spread of illness. He was shut up, right? So his gravest thoughts, because it was in the midst of COVID, his gravest thoughts was, I'm sure to get infected, since my daughter goes to school here, once infected, I would get a severe case, and being in my 70s, I'll probably die. That's what he was thinking, right? Then he forced himself to think of the best outcome. The best outcome was, I will not get infected, nor will any of my family. We will get through this soon, and everything is going to be okay. Next, he considered what's the most likely to happen. The most realistic outcome is I will probably eventually get infected. But like most adults, my symptoms will be non-existent or mild. And even though I'm in the age of risk, I still believe that I can get better and I will recover. It may take me longer to recover, but I still can recover. Finally, the last step is develop a plan for the most realistic. So it means you have to take another step. This is different than wasting energy on something that's unlikely to occur, that worst case scenario. It's coming up with a contingency plan for what could be a challenging situation. So your plan will depend on your individual circumstances. For instance, do you need to secure child care? If you stay at home, do I have everything that I need if I have to stay at home? If I fall into a high risk group, will there be someone to take care of me? Going ahead, if you know you're going to need that additional support, who do I need to make sure that is there, even in those worst case scenarios? Next slide. And how to stay optimistic. So we talked about how to shift our mind, but how do we stay optimistic? I love the first one. The first one is self-compassion, right? One of the keys to becoming more resilient is to practice compassion towards ourselves so that we can have compassion for others. And one of the keys in doing so is interrupting those reoccurring cycles of that negative inner dialogue. Think about what you're thinking about, because if you begin to do that, then you can shift to, I can take this one day at a time. I know this is frightening, but I can handle it. You can even write down these statements on index cards to refer when you find yourself in that negative loop, because that is how we keep ourselves from being compassionate to ourselves. And don't sweeten your negative feeling. It's supposed to be sweep. So don't sweep your negative feelings under the rug. Negative feelings serve a purpose. So don't be like, oh no, I'm not going to be negative. I'm not going to be negative. No, allow yourself to be negative. You shouldn't ignore them. Our negative emotions tells us something's wrong. It makes us more likely to give the problem the attention that it needs so that we can make that plan, so that we can make that shift. Negative emotions such as anxiety and fear and doubt can act like an attention funnel that narrows our minds to important details. So this can be valuable when evaluating situations, especially during the times and uncertain times that we've had. So now overly negative thoughts can be unhelpful, but they can allow us to begin to have more optimistic thoughts and find pleasure in small things. I'm suggesting people limit their news intake, yes, each day, and engage in pleasant activities. This doesn't mean shutting yourself off entirely, like shutting yourself off from the world, but consuming the information in a more intentional way. For example, instead of reading every update as it happens, you can set aside an hour in the morning and one in the evening that you just check the daily news, right? I remember back in the day before we even knew about all the other different newscasts that show us everything 24 hours a day. That's all we got. You had 8 a.m. news and you had 6 p.m. news. And our parents, they seem to be doing just fine. So we need to get back to some of that and look for meaning. I've been frequently, reading this quote that says, those who have a why to live can bear with almost anyhow, right? Because if you know how to deal with the why, if you have a why to live, then if you have a reason to live by, if you have something that you can hold on to, when we can choose to use this time to connect to ourselves and what's important to us, our values, then we can strive to be in the world. In other words, it's a good time to think about what matters to you most and then process those current events through that lens. And so I do want to ask you a quick question. When do you feel most alive? And if you could put that in the chat, you most like yourself. What are you doing? What are you doing? What or with whom are you surrounded by? If you could just place that in the chat. What are some things that when do you feel most like yourself? Like, what are you doing? Spending time with family, that's awesome. Spending time with family, at home reading, playing the piano. Oh, that's beautiful, Sonia. I love playing the piano too. And I don't care who's in the house. They just have to deal with it, even if I'm making mistakes. Laughing with friends, learn to laugh. Laugh, 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 even if ain't nothing else funny. Arranging flowers. Oh, that is beautiful. Cuddling my dog, spending time in the garden, time with the grandkids, self-care. You are exactly right, Marisol. Self-care is so important, and it's a discipline. It's not about trying to get all these massages and everything, spending hundreds of dollars. Going to sleep at a certain time, eating right is self-care, right? And doing things that you enjoy, taking care of my plants, being outdoors, anything self-care, and cooking. I've gotten into cooking too, trying to cook stuff I don't know what I'm doing, but it's okay. It's not even stressing me out. When it comes out right, I'm like really, really excited. So doing the things that when you do that, you're giving your spirit a break. And when we are in uncertain times as we are right now, and we're still in it, because it always seems to be something, you need to give your spirit a break. So I really do encourage that. Next slide. So let's be well. How do we do that? Interact with someone. Talk to another person for at least 10 minutes. Now, don't talk to people that's going to drain you. Try to find you somebody that you actually enjoy. Next slide. Pick up a new skill or a hobby, right? Find something that you enjoy doing, and several you share that. Do something like Scrabble or chess. Get yourself a good mental workout. Do something for others. Looking for not just we have self-care, we have compassion for ourselves, but how can we take care of others? Avoid alcohol and cigarette and drugs because that's just going to stress you out more in the end. Laughter is the best medicine. Honey, you have to learn how to laugh. Laugh, laugh, laugh. Your body does not know if it's funny or not. It just knows it's going to release those good endorphins. It's going to release those things that boost your immune system, gives you energy. And again, it gives yourself a break. And lastly, be grateful. So on the next slide, that's the one I want to focus on as we wrap up. And I turn it over to Ms. Donna. If you could just place in the chat, what are you grateful for? Because believe it or not, you can't be grateful and complain at the same time. So that is how you can remain optimistic in these uncertain times. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Steve. Appreciate that. I see quite a few things coming in for the chat.
Yes, I see people are grateful for their family. Oh, that is awesome. Thank you so much for the family's love. Yes, for this day, just being here another day, right? To be able to wake up and, be able to feel the wind blowing across your face. Just the simple things that we can find that we're grateful for. I encourage you, even if it's just, thinking about 5 things each day that you're grateful for, it can definitely shift your mindset. Absolutely. My spiritual relationship, that's the same for me too. It's extremely important to me. Absolutely. So thank you so much.
Thank you again, Dr. Speed, for that wonderful presentation, and what a lot of good information. It certainly, a lot of it resonated with me on a personal note. So thank you very much. We're going to shift just a little bit to Donna. Donna, are you unmuted?
Yes, I am.
There you go. Great. So a couple questions for you. If you would like to, we really would like to see your perspective and how you've dealt with remaining optimistic in these uncertain times. Can you give us an example of a stressful situation you have been in and talk about how you got through it?
Probably for me, more stressful than anything with my kidneys was having foot reconstruction. that I knew would take a year to heal from. I had to have a fixator that totally isolated me except for going to dialysis. As soon as I got my cast on, COVID hit. So I was still isolated, which actually made it a little easier for me, but it was just stressful because of the pain of the operation. I couldn't drive. I had to depend on somebody to take me everywhere. I couldn't even walk in my own house for about a month. So it was just too much dependence on other people. But what really helped me was, first of all, my faith. I spent a lot of time in prayer, and I had a lot of people that were praying for me, and that gave me a lot of courage and just made me feel a calmness there. Also, I had to just take it one day at a time. Uh, if I couldn't transfer to the wheelchair one day, okay, the next day I'm going to be able to transfer into the wheelchair and just take things a little one step at a time. And it was also just being able to attend church online. And then my family really stepped up. My son and daughter both took a week off work after I had my first surgery and came and stayed with me and stayed home with me. So just having that extra support. But it was so stressful, but I just kept, you know, taking that step. And also I kept reaching out to other people. One of my things that I do for church is send letters to shut-ins. And I made myself continue doing that during my healing time because doing something for someone else makes you feel better. So it was just really much more stressful than dialysis, I will tell you. And then I had to go to PT, and I thought that was going to be the end of the world. But I made it through, and I'm able to walk. But just those little things, having a spiritual component, having friends that check on you, and then doing something for someone else, even if it's as simple as just writing a letter. It made me still feel like I was part of the community.
Absolutely. Thank you. Wonderful. So Donna, as we continue to still cope with COVID-19 pandemic, what fears do you have about the future?
It just seems everybody is so discouraged. I look around dialysis center and I'm there pre-COVID and post-COVID, and everybody just seems so sad and nervous and worried. And for myself, I don't even watch the news at all. And for my COVID information, I stick with my trusted resources. I go to my physicians. I talk to them about vaccines. Living in Florida, we don't have to mask, but I talk to them about when is it appropriate for me to wear a mask. And that gives me a little bit of power in myself. And then I try to convey that to other people as well. I've had family members that have had COVID. One grandson had it twice. And I just encouraged him, to now that it's over, to start building up his health and working on that. And it just makes me sad that everybody just seems so stressed. But I don't know how to cure other people other than to try to be an example of, look, don't believe everything that you read. You don't have, a microchip in your arm from the vaccine. Talk to your doctors, talk to the experts. That's the best way to deal with COVID. And it's going to be here. We're going to live with it. And just, I think of it like getting a flu shot. I don't give up my flu shot. If I have to get a COVID shot every year, all the better for my health.
Right. Great. Thank you. Good advice. Thank you for sharing. So what activities do you engage in to lift your spirits?
Oh, well, I'm very active at my church. I teach sometimes. I'm also active in the music ministry there. I play the piano, and I enjoy that. And we have a very active women's group, so I'm involved in that. I also, like I said, I write letters to shut-ins. And then for myself, I like to write letters just to friends. And that really, it sounds like a simple thing, but if I write somebody a letter and then they respond, if I get a letter back, it's like a hallelujah day. But if they come to me and say, what you wrote me really encouraged me, that just makes me feel like I'm giving back a little bit of what people have given me. I stay learning. I'm trying to learn 2 different languages. I read, somebody had put on there, one of her things is family and reading. I read every day purely for pleasure. I don't read anything that's good for me. I just read what I want to read. And then if I have to read, you know, something, I'll read it, but I read for pleasure and enjoy that. Music, and then family. Anytime I can be with my family. And just even thinking about my family, trying to come up with my grandkids live in another city, texting them because they don't answer the phone, but texting them or sending them a gift by Amazon, just these little things that keep me going.
Mhm.
However, since I am on dialysis, I have to recognize there are days where I'm tired. After on Monday, I'm wiped out after dialysis, and I give myself permission to take a nap and rest on those days. Because you can't, with being a kidney patient, you can't just force yourself constantly to be on the go. Sometimes you have to sit back and rest, and that's self-care. And I do allow myself that. If my husband plans something and I don't feel like it, he's very kind and says, okay, we'll replan. So you have to be kind of balanced in what you can do and what you can't do.
Great, thank you. Thank you for sharing. So, what was one thing a healthcare provider did for you or said to you to help boost your mental spirits when you were feeling down?
I have to say it's happened, over 14 years, it's happened several times. But when they ask me how I'm feeling and they sincerely want to know how I'm feeling, and then they'll stop and listen carefully, and sometimes we'll make a plan. I have a lot of blood pressure issues, and we make a plan together. And just to know that they're sincerely listening, taking the time to listen, is a huge thing for me. I am a talker, and my love language is being heard. So when they sit and will sit with me, whether it's the charge nurse or the tech, or the social worker, that makes a huge difference in my experience. And I've been very blessed to have really good social worker and techs and nurses that will take the time to do that. I don't think they realize 5 minutes out of their day makes a huge difference in mine. And so that's probably the best thing for me.
Right, right. Absolutely. Great. Thank you. I'm going to ask Donna one more question. If anybody, though, just as a reminder, has any questions for either Donna or Dr. Speed, please feel free to send them into the chat. So, Donna, just one more thing. With the COVID pandemic still with us, and we have maybe some people on the call who are new to dialysis, some that are long term, what advice would you give others who are struggling now?
One day at a time. Sometimes you have to take it an hour at a time. I know people have a wrong idea about dialysis. They think that I go and I lay in an easy chair and just sit there for 3 hours and watch TV. They don't understand the stress of your body. So sometimes you just have to allow yourself, yes, this is a difficult thing, but I'm going to take it one day at a time, one day at a time. The next thing, which is a big deal with me, is to be compliant. Find out exactly your dietary limitations because we're not all the same. I can eat some things other people can't, but find out your dietary limitations, find out your fluid restrictions, and be compliant. Just follow the rules. Don't skip treatments, don't shorten treatments, and you will feel so much better, and especially if you keep your labs in line. And for me, I have polycystic, so my body just rebelled against me. And I had a really hard time when I was diagnosed. I'm like, what? What? These cysts are growing. I did not allow this. That was very difficult for me. But I found control in being compliant. I can control my diet. I can control my fluid intake. So for me, that was a huge game changer. And it makes me in control of dialysis rather than dialysis being in control of my life. And finally, I think you should have a spiritual aspect. Like I said, I am a churchgoer, I am a prayer, but it doesn't matter what your religion is or what you believe. I think you need to have some kind of spiritual component. Uh, for me, I pray, but I also look for affirmations. Look for quotes that are empowering that I can read and say, okay, I found one. Every month I pick a new theme. And, big deal. In February, it was love. But I found this great quote, and I thought, this is a good way to live your life. It says, being deeply loved by someone gives you strength, while loving someone deeply gives you courage. And I thought, wow, I love my family deeply enough that that gives me the courage to go through dialysis and not give up. That may give somebody the courage to get on a transplant list, which I did. I was on the transplant list for another 10 years after my transplant failed, but with discussing with my family, I took myself off for various reasons. But I thought, when you love someone deeply, even if it's just your dog, that gives you the courage to do what you need to do to take care of your health. And I really think a spiritual aspect is important. And take time in meditation, take time for affirmation. And I think that makes a huge difference if you're a dialysis patient. That and compliance, compliance, compliance. They know me, my doctor, I'm his gold star patient because I am his most compliant patient. I do everything he tells me to do. Well, except for skipping the chocolate. I do eat chocolate now and again, but that's okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
I hope that answered your question.
It did. Thank you so much. And I love your passage that you shared with us.
Isn't that great?
That's wonderful.
Oh, I didn't tell you the man. It's Lao Tzu. I didn't make it up. It's from Lao Tzu, a Chinese writer.
Great. Well, don't have any questions in the chat. There is a comment from Kelly. Says, thank you so much for sharing your story. Love your positivity and resilience.